The cold does not bother me anymore. That is how I know something fundamental has broken inside whatever I have become. I remember when frost meant beauty, when snowflakes catching the morning light through crystal spires would make my breath catch in wonder. Now I crouch in darkness so complete that the memory of light feels like a story someone else told me about a life that was never mine. My fingers trace the cave wall beside me, and I feel the texture of stone that has never known the sun. The dampness seeps through what remains of my robes, and somewhere the water drips in a rhythm that has measured more years than I can count. Deeper in this blackness, I hear the clicking, the shuffling, the wet, hungry breathing of creatures that were once my people. I press myself against the rock and try not to scream, because screaming would only tell them where I am, and they are always so terribly hungry. I was a keeper of records in the archives of the Chantry of Auriel, one of the last great refuges of my people hidden deep within the forgotten veil. Not a priest, not a paladin, not anyone whose name would be remembered in the songs my people once sang. I was the one who catalogued the scrolls, who carefully copied fading texts onto fresh vellum, who spent my days surrounded by the accumulated wisdom of countless generations. The other keepers called me Vailindril, though that name means nothing now. Names require someone to speak them, and the creatures in the dark have forgotten how to form words at all. My days followed comfortable rhythms that I ache to remember now. I would wake before dawn in my small chamber within the Chantry's eastern wing, where a window of enchanted ice let in light without cold. The sheets were spun from the silk of cave spiders bred in the vale, soft as clouds and warm despite their origin. My chamber smelled of cedar incense and old books, scents that clung to my robes so thoroughly that they had become part of my identity. I would dress in my simple white robes, checking the embroidered silver thread along the hems that marked my station, and take my morning meal of preserved berries and mountain goat cheese in the communal hall. The cheese had a particular sharpness that I can still taste if I concentrate, though each year the memory grows fainter. Then I would descend to the lower archives where I did my work. The stairs were carved from a single piece of enchanted ice that never melted, each step worn smooth by thousands of years of feet. The smell of old parchment and binding glue became so familiar to me that I stopped noticing it entirely. I thought I would grow old surrounded by those scents, that my life would be a quiet one of preservation and small scholarly satisfactions. The greatest adventure I expected was perhaps translating a particularly challenging text or discovering a scroll that had been misfiled centuries ago. Our cities had been wonders that the other races of Tamriel could barely comprehend, or so the old texts claimed. By the time I was born, many of those cities were already shadows of what they had been, their populations dwindling, their towers standing half empty. But the elders remembered the height of our power. They told us we had lived in this land since before the Nords knew what Skyrim was, when these mountains perhaps bore a different name in a tongue only we still whispered. The Merethic era had seen our civilization reach heights that the younger races would never equal. Our towers rose from the mountain peaks like frozen flames reaching toward Auriel's domain, their crystalline walls catching the sun and scattering it into rainbows that painted the snow for miles around. We carved our homes from glacial ice and living stone, using magic that the younger races would later try and fail to replicate. Every doorway was a work of art. Every corridor was a gallery. The great temples dedicated to our god shone with an inner light that never dimmed, powered by enchantments so old that even our mages had forgotten how to replicate them. The songs of our priests carried across the frozen valleys with a beauty that could make even the hardest heart weep. I heard those songs every morning and every evening for more years than many humans live, and I never once grew tired of them. The way the voices would harmonize, building layers of sound that seemed to touch something beyond the physical world. I would pause in my work sometimes, just to listen, and feel a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with temperature. I took all of this for granted. Everyone does, until it is gone. The Nords came in their crude wooden ships, landing on shores we had watched for thousands of years. We observed them with curiosity at first, these loud, violent creatures who seemed barely capable of surviving a single winter. They wore animal skins and shouted at each other across distances that required no shouting. Their magic was primitive. Their art was primitive. Their understanding of the world was the understanding of children just learning to speak. They built a settlement they called Sarthol, and we watched them multiply like rabbits, spreading across land that had been ours since the Merethic era. Some of our leaders argued for driving them out immediately. The humans were vermin, they said, and vermin should be exterminated before they could infest the whole land. Others, including the archcurate himself, counseled patience. They were short-lived things, these humans. 60 years, 80 if they were particularly robust, and then they died. Their generations turned over so quickly that they could barely maintain consistent traditions, let alone build anything that would threaten a civilization as ancient as ours. They would destroy themselves through their own foolishness soon enough. We need only wait. Then our scouts discovered what they had found beneath Sarthal. The reports were fragmentary at first, passed through channels I was not meant to have access to. But I was a records keeper, and records keepers hear things. The Nords had uncovered something while digging the foundations of their crude wooden buildings, an artifact of such power that even I, a lowly cataloguer of scrolls, heard the whispers about it. The Eye, they called it, though what eye, and whose eye no one would say aloud. Some claimed it lay beneath Sarthal itself. Others said it was merely a rumor. No one below the rank of archcurate would confirm anything, but whatever it was, the whispers spoke of a fragment of Magnus himself, left behind when the god fled creation, or perhaps something older still, something from before the gods themselves existed. Whatever it was, it could not remain in human hands. Humans could not be trusted with power. They burned too hot and died too quickly, always grasping for more than they could safely hold. Our leaders made their decision with the same cold calculation that had preserved our people for countless millennia. I was not at Sarthal on the night we attacked. I was in the archives as always, copying a treatise on lunar enchantments by candlelight while snow fell softly beyond the frozen windows. I learned of the assault only through the reports that filtered back to the Chantry over the following days. We struck at night, overwhelming the settlement with superior numbers and magic they could not comprehend. The humans fell like wheat before the scythe, frozen solid before they could scream, impaled on spears of ice that materialized from the air itself. We took back what they had no right to possess and secured it in places they could never reach. Justice was served, or so we told ourselves. The few survivors who escaped into the wilderness seemed too insignificant to pursue. A handful of traumatized refugees stumbling through the snow, most likely to die of exposure before they reached any shelter. What threat could they possibly pose to a civilization that had endured since the dawn of recorded time? We had faced dragons in our youth. We had weathered cataclysms that reshaped continents. A few dozen frightened humans were beneath our notice. The answer arrived within a handful of winters, when a human named Ysgramor returned with 500 warriors and a hatred that burned hotter than any flame our mages could conjure. The first reports reached the Chantry on a morning that had started like any other. I was in the lower archives, copying a treatise on the proper maintenance of wayshrine crystals, when I heard shouting from the upper levels. The sound was so foreign in that peaceful place that I initially thought I had imagined it. Then running footsteps echoed down the stairs, and one of the junior acolytes burst into the reading room with a face so pale he might have been carved from the ice outside. Within the hour, refugees began streaming through the Chantry's gates. Their stories made no sense at first. Entire cities, fallen in a single night. Armies of Nords that seemed to materialize from the snow itself. Warriors who fought with a ferocity that bordered on madness, who took no prisoners and showed no mercy. They spoke of weapons that cut through enchanted ice like it was summer mist. They spoke of war cries that shattered concentration spells before they could be completed. They spoke of a rage so pure and focused that it seemed less like emotion and more like a force of nature. I wanted to believe they were exaggerating. Traumatized survivors always embellish their tales, and these people had clearly suffered greatly. But the refugees kept coming, and their numbers told a story that required no exaggeration. Thousands of my people, then tens of thousands, all fleeing eastward toward the Chantry and the mountain passes beyond. The cities I had known only from descriptions in ancient texts, places I had hoped to visit someday, were being erased from existence one by one. The snow outside began to taste like ash. At first I thought it was my imagination, until someone explained that the Nords were burning everything they captured, every tower, every temple, every archive like the one I tended so carefully. The accumulated wisdom of ages was becoming fuel for bonfires that celebrated our destruction. The archcurate called an assembly of all who remained. We gathered in the great sanctum beneath the Chantry, where the light of Auriel's blessing illuminated the faithful through crystal formations that had taken 3,000 years to grow. The chamber could hold 10,000 worshippers standing shoulder to shoulder, and it was barely sufficient for the crowd that gathered that day. Refugees pressed against refugees, children crying, elders struggling to stand, everyone searching the faces around them for family members who might have escaped other fallen cities. The arch-curate spoke without amplification. His voice, trained through centuries of devotion, reached every corner of that vast space. He told us the truth without softening it. The Nords were not merely raiding. They were conducting a systematic extermination. Every Snow Elf city they captured, they burned to the foundations. Every library, every temple, every work of art we had created over millennia of civilization, they destroyed with gleeful thoroughness. This was not war. This was erasure. They did not want to defeat us. They wanted to ensure that no evidence of our existence would remain. We had weapons. We had magic far superior to anything the humans possessed. We had the favor of Auriel himself, whose blessings strengthened our spells and protected our faithful. But we did not have numbers. The humans bred like vermin, their short lives driving them to reproduce with an urgency my long-lived people had never needed to match. For every Nord that fell, 3 more seemed to take their place. For every Snow Elf that fell, there was one less voice to sing the old songs, one less mind to remember the old ways, one less pair of hands to maintain the traditions we had preserved since the world was young. Our birth rate had seemed adequate for thousands of years. Why rush to produce children when you had centuries to raise them? Why crowd the world with new lives when the existing ones were so satisfying? We had optimized for quality over quantity, for depth over breadth, for wisdom accumulated over generations rather than the frantic multiplication of the short-lived. Against human fertility, that strategy was extinction. The chantry held longer than most. The inner sanctum was designed as a fortress as well as a temple, and the knight paladins who guarded it were the finest warriors our people had ever produced. Their armor was forged from metal that sang when struck, enchanted to turn aside even the heaviest blow. Their weapons could cut through stone, and their training had prepared them to fight for days without rest. I watched them defend the outer gates for 9 days. 9 days of constant assault, of Nord war horns echoing off the mountains, of the clash of metal and the thunder of siege weapons they had dragged through the snow. The knight paladins fought with a precision that made violence look like art. Their movements coordinated so perfectly that they seemed like extensions of a single will. But for every paladin who fell, there were 50 Nords waiting to take their place at the front. The snow around the chantry gates turned red, then froze into crimson ice that cracked beneath the weight of fresh bodies. On the 9th night, the gates fell. I did not see it happen. I was in the lower archives, packing what I could into satchels and cases, working with the desperate efficiency of someone who knows they are running out of time. Around me, other scholars did the same, tears streaming down their faces as they tried to decide which texts were most valuable, which scrolls represented knowledge that could never be recovered, which artifacts held secrets that must not be lost. We could not take everything. We could not take even a fraction of everything. We had to choose, and every choice was a small death. The surviving knight paladins retreated through the chantry in good order, collapsing tunnels behind them to slow the Nord advance. The explosions shook dust from ceilings that had not moved in millennia. I felt the mountain itself groaning, wounded by the violence we were inflicting on it in our desperate flight. My satchel held perhaps 40 scrolls and a single crystalline data lattice that contained the indices for our entire collection. If we survived, we could at least know what we had lost. We ran through darkness. The deep passages beneath the mountains had been carved by forces older than our civilization. Natural fissures expanded by water and time into a maze that extended for countless miles. Most of my people knew them only from legends, the tunnels that connected the great chantries and allowed travel even in the worst winters. We had no maps, no guides, only the desperate hope that somewhere in this labyrinth we might find safety. The Nords could not follow us into the deep places. Even their hatred had limits. Or so we believed. Days blurred into weeks. We rationed our food until there was nothing left to ration. The glowing lichens that illuminated some passages provided barely enough light to see the person ahead of you, and in the lightless stretches we held hands like children, forming chains of the terrified and the exhausted that stumbled forward into nothing. Our supplies dwindled. The elderly and the very young began to fail first. I watched a mother lay her infant in a crevice and walk away because she no longer had milk to feed it. The child did not cry for long. I watched an elder who had taught me the proper forms for recording historical dates simply sit down against a cave wall, close his eyes, and refuse to move again. His name was Relaril, and he had served the archives for 800 years, and no one had the strength to convince him that continuing was worth the effort. We left their bodies where they fell because we had neither the strength nor the time for proper rites. The prayers for the dead require a full day of singing, of rituals that celebrate the life that was lived, of offerings to Ori El that ensure the soul finds its way to Aetherius. We could offer nothing but a whispered apology and the desperate hope that the god would understand. Somewhere in the darkness behind us, we could hear the echoes of Nord war horns, growing fainter but never quite disappearing. They were still hunting us, even here, even in passages so deep that no human had any right to know they existed. Their hatred transcended reason. Then we found the doors. They were unlike anything I had ever seen, wrought from metal that gleamed even without light to reflect, covered in geometric patterns that seemed to shift when you were not looking at them directly. The mechanisms that controlled them were hidden behind seamless panels, their workings as mysterious as the civilization that had created them. Dwemer. The word passed through our exhausted refugees like a cold wind. The deep elves, our distant cousins, who had vanished from the surface world so long ago that most races had forgotten they ever existed. We knew they still lived somewhere in the depths. We had avoided them for good reason. Their philosophy was strange, their morality stranger still. They had rejected the gods entirely, which we considered a kind of madness. They had bent their considerable intellect toward understanding and manipulating the fundamental forces of existence, which we considered dangerous. Their attitude toward other mer ranged from contemptuous disinterest to something that might have been predatory curiosity, and we had never been certain which was more threatening. But we were desperate, and desperation makes beggars of us all. The doors opened before anyone touched them. The Dwemer had been expecting us. Their city stretched beneath the mountain in a cavern so vast that it had its own weather, its own false sky of luminescent fungus and mechanical lights that hung suspended from nothing visible. Massive bronze machines churned in the darkness, performing functions I could not begin to comprehend, their sounds forming a constant background hum that vibrated in your bones. The Dwemer themselves watched us enter with expressions that revealed nothing. Their faces seemed carved from the same metal as their doors, handsome in an angular way but completely unreadable. Their leader, a tonal architect whose name I could not pass in their archaic dialect, welcomed us with words that seemed friendly but eyes that calculated something I could not name. His robes were covered in equations, formulas that described realities I had no framework to understand. When he smiled, it did not reach his eyes. When he extended his hand in greeting, there was something mechanical in the precision of the gesture. They offered us shelter. They offered us food. They offered us survival itself when every other option had been stripped away. All they asked in return was our service. The terms were not explained clearly. Perhaps they could not be, in any language we shared. We would work for them, the tonal architect said, performing tasks suited to our abilities. We would live in quarters they would provide. We would eat food they would give us. In exchange, we would be safe from the Nords forever. The deep places were their domain, and no surface dweller had ever penetrated their defenses. Some of my people wept with relief. Others looked at those bronze walls and those calculating eyes and felt the same unease that coiled in my stomach. But what choice did we have? The Nords were still hunting us. The surface world was lost. This was the only path that led anywhere other than extinction. We agreed. The first warning should have been the quarters they assigned us. Not homes, not chambers, but barracks. Long halls lined with narrow bunks, walls of cold metal that sweated condensation in the humid underground air. No windows, of course. No decorations. No space for personal belongings beyond what would fit in a small chest at the foot of each bed. We had gone from crystal towers that touched the sky to boxes designed to hold sleeping bodies and nothing more. The food they gave us was fungus. Pale, fleshy growths that tasted of nothing and filled the belly without satisfying. They called it the blessing of shelter, but they never ate it themselves. I noticed that immediately. The Dwemer ate different food, prepared in kitchens we were not permitted to enter, served on plates we were not permitted to touch. When I asked about this, The overseer assigned to our section simply smiled that mechanical smile and said our constitutions were different. We ate the fungus because there was nothing else, and at first it seemed like merely another indignity to endure. We had survived the loss of our homes, our cities, our entire civilization. We could survive bland food, but within days, the effects began to manifest. Headaches that built behind the eyes, starting as mild discomfort and growing into agony that no remedy could touch. Sensitivity to light that made even the dim glow of the fungus ceiling painful to look at. A creeping fog in the mind that made it harder and harder to concentrate, to remember, to care about anything beyond the immediate present. I would try to recall the words to songs I had known all my life and find only fragments. I would try to picture the faces of colleagues I had worked beside for centuries and see only smears of color. I watched my people change. The scholars forgot how to read. At first it was just the older texts, the archaic scripts that required effort to parse, but then it spread to simpler writings, until the very concept of symbols representing sounds seemed foreign to them. The artists forgot how to see, their trained eyes losing the ability to perceive color and composition, their hands shaking when they tried to hold tools. The singers forgot the melodies that had defined us for countless generations, their voices growing hoarse and strange until they could produce nothing but tuneless croaking. And those of us who recognized what was happening, who tried to refuse the food or escape the city, discovered the second truth about Dwemer hospitality. The doors that had opened so easily to let us in did not open from the inside. The tunnels that might have led back to the surface were guarded by automatons that did not tire, did not sleep, did not negotiate. Their metal faces held no expression as they turned back anyone who approached. Their metal hands held weapons that could kill with a touch. I tried once to plead with an overseer, to explain what was happening to us, to beg for different food or medical treatment or anything that might stop the deterioration. He listened with that unchanging expression, nodded when I finished speaking, and then explained very calmly that this was exactly what they intended. The Dwemer had not saved us. They had acquired us. We were labor, nothing more. Bodies to perform the dangerous work of maintaining their deep city, digging new tunnels, hauling ore from mines that went down into heat that no Dwemer wished to endure. The fungus was not an unfortunate necessity but a deliberate tool, designed to make us docile, to erase the identity that might have inspired resistance, to reduce us from people into things. He told me this without anger, without cruelty, without any emotion I could identify. To him, it was simply efficient. A problem had been identified, and a solution had been implemented. Our suffering was not his concern because we were not, in any sense that mattered to him, real. We had not found sanctuary. We had walked willingly into a prison that would never release us. The transformation accelerated with each generation. The elders who remembered the surface died off, still clinging to fragments of who they had been, still whispering songs they could no longer complete. Their children had only pieces of stories to pass down, confused accounts of a sky they had never seen, and light that made no sense to ears that knew only darkness. The children's children had even less. Within a few centuries, my people no longer remembered that we had ever lived anywhere else. The physical changes followed the mental ones. Eyes that had grown sensitive to light began to seal themselves shut, the lids fusing together into ridged scars. Bodies that no longer stood upright began to hunch forward, adapting to the crawling and climbing that characterized life in the tunnels. Skin that never saw sunlight became translucent, then grey, then something that was not really skin at all but a chitinous covering that protected against the constant scrapes and cuts of underground life. We had become slaves in truth as well as practice, bred for labor and violence, our bodies twisted by the fungi the Dwemer continued to feed us, our minds hollowed out until nothing remained but animal instinct and a hatred that had no memory of its origin. I was spared the worst of it, not through any virtue of my own, but through accident and desperation. I found a way to escape before the corruption took full hold. A section of tunnel that the Dwemer had not fully sealed, a gap in their surveillance network where an automaton had broken down and not yet been replaced, a desperate climb through fissures so narrow I had to dislocate my own shoulders to pass through them. The pain was extraordinary. I remember screaming until my throat bled, wedging myself through spaces that seemed to grow tighter with every inch, feeling the rocks scrape away skin and flesh as I forced myself upward. At one point I became stuck so completely that I thought I would die there, trapped in a crack in the earth with nothing to mark my passing. But I kept pushing, kept clawing, kept refusing to accept that this stone coffin would be my end. I emerged into darkness that was different from Dwemer darkness, natural rather than engineered, and I fled until my legs gave out beneath me. I have wandered these caves ever since. How long has it been? I cannot say. Time loses meaning without the sun to mark its passage. I count by hunger, by thirst, by the cycles of exhaustion and fitful rest that have replaced proper sleep. Sometimes I find pools of water clear enough to see my reflection, and I barely recognize the creature staring back at me. My eyes have grown larger, better suited to darkness. My skin has paled to something close to translucency. My hair, once the color of morning frost, has become white and brittle. I am changing too, just more slowly than those who remained below. And sometimes, in the deepest passages, I encounter what my people have become. They do not recognize me. There is nothing left in them to recognize anyone. They hunt by sound and smell, their sealed-over eyes useless for anything except making them more horrible to behold. Their bodies are hunched and twisted, adapted for the crawling, climbing, stalking existence that is all they know. They wear scraps of chitin armor that they craft with hands that remember techniques their minds have forgotten. They attack anything that moves with a savagery that goes beyond hunger. I have hidden from them. I have run from them. Once, when I could not escape, I fought them. I killed 3 before the others overwhelmed me. My blade found gaps in their chitin, and the blood that splashed across my face was cold. My people's blood had always run cold, but never this cold, never this dead. I only survived because something larger in the darkness drove them away before they could finish the job. Something they feared more than they desired my flesh. The worst part is that sometimes, when I watch them from hiding, I see flickers of what they were. A mother Falmer will stroke the head of her spawn with something approaching tenderness, her clawed hand gentle in a way that speaks to instincts that survived even complete mental destruction. A group of warriors will coordinate their hunting with tactical sophistication that speaks to minds not entirely lost, flanking prey, setting ambushes, communicating through clicks and gestures that accomplish complex goals. They have language still, of a sort, not the elegant poetry of our ancestors, but sounds that carry meaning, that distinguish friend from food. They are not animals. That would be easier to accept. They are my people, reduced and twisted and corrupted. But my people still. The songs they will never sing again, the art they will never create, the wisdom they will never preserve, all of it lives on only in my deteriorating memory. I am the library of the Snow Elves now, a single broken shelf holding the last few scorched pages of a culture that once filled countless volumes. The Dwemer are gone. I do not know how or why. I only know that their cities lie empty now, their machines still running on automation that will outlast any observer. Whatever happened to them, it happened suddenly and completely, every one of them vanishing in a single moment and leaving behind only their constructs and their ruins. The Falmer have spread through the abandoned halls like rats through a sinking ship, claiming the spaces their former masters left behind. They breed without restraint, their numbers swelling beyond anything the Dwemer would have permitted. Perhaps someday they will find their way back to the surface and take their unknowing revenge on the descendants of those who drove them underground. Perhaps that would be justice. I cannot decide. I think often about the choice we made. When we stood before those bronze doors and weighed extinction against something we did not understand, was there another path? Could we have fought the Nords to the last, rather than accept the Dwemer's poisoned mercy? Would it have been better to die as ourselves than to survive as what we became? The dead do not struggle with questions of identity. The dead do not watch their children become monsters. The dead do not spend endless years in darkness, knowing that they are the last one left who remembers what it felt like to stand in sunlight and raise their voice in praise of Auriel. I have heard rumors that others survived, whispers in the dark, fragments of hope that I cannot quite abandon. Somewhere in the forgotten corners of Skyrim, a handful of my people escaped both the Nords and the Dwemer, maintaining the old ways in hidden sanctuaries that even the passage of millennia has not revealed. Night paladins guarding way shrines that no one visits anymore, their armor still bright, their songs still true. The last pure bloodlines of a race the world believes is extinct. I search for them sometimes, in my more lucid moments. I follow passages that seem to lead upward, toward the sky I have not seen in more years than I can count. But the tunnels always twist back on themselves, or end in collapses, or lead to chambers where the Falmer have made their nests. And my eyes grow weaker by the decade, adapting to the darkness whether I want them to or not. I wonder if I would recognize the sun anymore if I found my way back to it. I wonder if it would recognize me. The clicking sounds are growing closer. They have found my scent again, or heard some noise I made without realizing. I will have to move soon, flee deeper into the maze, find another temporary refuge in another lightless corner of this underground prison that stretches beneath all of Skyrim. This is my existence now. Running and hiding and remembering things that no one else in the world cares about anymore. I was a keeper of records once. I preserved the past so that the future would not forget. Now I am the record, the last entry in a library that is being erased one memory at a time. When I finally die, whether by Falmer claws or simple exhaustion or the slow corruption that creeps through my changing flesh, the Snow Elves will truly be gone, not the twisted creatures that bear our name in the darkness, the real us. The people who built crystal towers and sang praises to the sun. The people who loved beauty and sought wisdom and believed that civilization would last forever. We were wrong about so many things. The clicks are very close now. I can smell them. That particular odor of fungal corruption and unwashed bodies packed together in lightless warrens. My hand finds the knife I carry, the blade corroded and dull from years of neglect. It will not save me if they catch me. It is only for one purpose now. The final choice. The last dignity, the option I have put off making for longer than I should have. Not today. I still have distance I can put between us, corners I can duck around, crevices I can squeeze through. The instinct to survive is hard to overcome, even when survival means only more years of this. Even when the alternative is just another form of becoming like them. I move through darkness toward more darkness, and I carry with me everything that remains of a people who once touched the sky. It is not enough. It could never be enough. But it is all I have, and I will hold on to it until my fingers finally uncurl and the last snow elf releases her grip on a world that forgot us long ago. Oriel, if you can still hear me in these depths, I do not ask for rescue. I do not ask for vengeance. I only ask that somewhere, somehow, someone remembers we existed. Not as monsters, not as a cautionary tale, not as the shambling horrors that lurk beneath Skyrim waiting to drag the unwary into darkness. As people who loved and dreamed and built things of beauty, remember us as we were, not as what we became.